Light up the sky, let morning come. Pick up my pieces when I come undone. In the dark of the night, let me see it shining, shining. 'Cause you are my black sun.
I've always been a fan of ribbon microphones, and I remember even in the earliest days of my career when I started as a tape op, many of the senior engineers would use ribbon microphones. In those days they would often use the black Coles STC microphones, and they'd use them in a number of applications, generally as drum overhead mics, especially in the days when multi-miking wasn't as prevalent as it is now. You'd have just a pair of overheads and maybe a bass drum microphone. Then they'd use it a lot on brass. That seemed to be a very popular choice. So I learnt fairly early on the way that ribbon mics sounded. I've never owned any classic ribbon microphones, and those that are around second hand are generally in quite poor condition. And one of the big problems with ribbon microphones is that, number one, if you accidentally bang them or drop them, you can break them. And if you're not absolutely looking out for your phantom power switch and accidentally send phantom power to a ribbon microphone, very often they can damage them. So I was really excited when I saw that Audio-Technica had a couple of ribbon microphones coming out, that they had first of all used modern technology, so they were very reliable and very solidly built. And secondly, they used phantom power, so there was no chance of any accident. And by using phantom power, they also get over the other problem that often ribbon microphones have, is that they're quite low level. Now, how do I use ribbon microphones? I use them in two different ways. The first choice is this beautiful little thing here. Now, this really is superb at capturing the sound of a guitar amplifier. This is the AT4081. Now, the other thing that maybe not everybody does know, but the way a ribbon microphone captures the sound is not in a cardioid way. They're sort of like a figure of eight sound. That's perfect for capturing guitar amplifiers because you want the sound of as close as you can get to the grill of the amplifier, but you also want to capture a little bit of the room, and a ribbon microphone does that incredibly well. And very often what I will do is multi-mic an amplifier, particularly something like a Vox AC30 that has the two speakers. I'll put the ribbon microphone maybe on the left hand side and then put another microphone on the right hand side, and using a couple of very interesting technical tricks. One particularly, I use this little radial phaser which tricks the phasing of the two microphones, and you can get some very, very interesting colours with the microphone because it induces cancellation, but cancellation in a controlled way. You can also introduce cancellation by moving the microphone slightly off axis. So highly recommended for guitar amplifiers. I've also used it on a couple of Natalie McCall's recordings as an additional acoustic mic. So I'll have a very close mic, or indeed even sometimes just the DI of the acoustic guitar itself, but have this as the microphone that's a couple of feet back from her, and that captures both the sound of the guitar and a small amount of a vocal, especially if we're doing a live vocal, as often we do with acoustic sessions. So my second ribbon microphone is the Audio-Technica 4080. Now this is a most unusual microphone. It looks kind of like an old 50s microphone, which I really like. But the sound quality is reminiscent of that era, but without any of the problems. I recorded one of Natalie McCall's vocals on this, and it reminded me of a Patsy Cline vocal. It had that really thick, rich quality that those vocals of that era have. They're sort of huge, larger-than-life vocals, and quite dense sounding, and they don't have that sort of modern sibilant high end that you get, which is sometimes desirable, especially on R&B records. But if you want a really rich, thick vocal sound, this absolutely delivers. I've also used this very recently with the new group I'm working with, Daytona Lights, because one of the band members plays trombone, and there is trombone on one of the songs, so we use this to capture the trombone. Fantastic sound because you get the impact of the trombone, but you're capturing a little bit of the room. And I did use this actually at an outside recording studio at Metropolis Studios, and I was very excited about the amount of room reverb that room actually has. It's got a real ping to it which enhanced it. Your choice of microphone preamp is really important as well. a quality microphone preamp, such as a Focusrite, which I use, with this really enhances the sound. And I've also recently been using one of the Prism microphone preamps. So the choice of preamp can colour your sound even further. So I think that's an essential trick to remember, that when using a ribbon microphone, play around with the choices of microphone preamps, because they can change the colour a lot. But in the example that I mentioned using Natalie McCall, I did actually use the Prism preamp on her vocal, and I used the Focusrite on the guitar. And that was the two choices of colour that I had. And the Prism microphone preamp on this is a very absolute straight line. It's not adding any colour whatsoever. So that's important. But there are microphone preamps around, particularly valve-based ones, that can add a colour. And I have also, on a couple of occasions, used the Liquid Channel. Now, those that are not familiar with the Liquid Channel, is that is a sort of microphone preamp, but with a kind of a plug-in architecture where you can add the sound and particularly the distortion of vintage microphone preamps. And that, I think, is a fascinating way of working with a ribbon microphone, because you're getting, particularly with a microphone like this, you're getting a quality pickup with no background noise, just the sound of the capsule itself, but you're adding modern coloration to it in the choice of some of the plugins, such as a vintage valve preamp, vintage valve compressor, both of which add second, third harmonic distortion. And that's, I think, an interesting choice. These are the tools of our trade. How do we capture the sound? Because nobody really wants the sound of the amp, the sound of the drums. If you stand in a recording studio and listen to an amp or a drum kit, they don't sound that great generally. They sound kind of like, whoa. What you really want is the sound of the recording, and that's a very, very different. You put your ear, which I don't recommend, you put your ear right next to the guitar amp, that's the tone that somebody wants. And then they want the tone of the room, but they don't want the sound of the two things separate. And it's a very interesting art, capturing the sound of a guitar amplifier. Generally speaking, that close sound mixed with a room mic sound and blended together often is the sound of so many great classic records.